Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the sixth session of the second day of the 13th edition of Apeejay Kolkata Literary Festival. AKLF celebrates books, music, art, film, and more with the finest creative minds in the nation and globally. The unprecedented times and the pandemic have shaken our lives. The whole world adopted a new normal mode of living, experiencing things like never before. In these circumstances, a writer who understands the human heart stepped in and felt the need to document not just what she is going through personally, but also what the entire world is experiencing. Let's welcome Shobhaa, one of the India's top best-selling authors, journalist, columnist, social commentator, opinion shaper, and former model. Her book, Lockdown Liaison, is in this session titled Lockdown Liaison, Love in the Time of COVID. We also have with us Oindrilla Dutt. Oindrilla Dutt is an arts and events curator and a presenter, a moderator, and a freelance writer. She is associated with a number of NGOs and has served on the editorial board of Upper Class magazine. We're delighted to have you both here with us. Before I hand over the session to Oindrilla ma'am, I request the audience to type their questions in the comment section below for the panel to be addressed. Over to Oindrilla ma'am.
Thank you so much, Shanchari. And it's absolutely wonderful to be here once again at the Apeejay Kolkata Literary Festival, AKLF, which is in its 13th year, organized by Oxford Bookstore, a centurion in Calcutta. 100 years of heritage, which is an indelible part of the city. And what is really special is doing this with Shobhaa once again. Lovely to be with you, Shobhaa.
Thank you.
And we're going to, this has been a really easy and wonderful read. Entertaining, good. And for those of you who haven't got this book as yet, it's available at all the Oxford bookstores. If you want to order it online, please do so at www.oxfordbookstore.com. It's worth reading. It's a quick, easy read. Shobhaa, Lockdown Liaisons has been a new format for you. You're on the digital platform, first ebooks and then a paperback. So how different has this been for you? What was the experience like? And do you think digital is the way forward?
To start with, I'd like to thank the incredible team behind the Apeejay Kolkata Literary Festival and Oxford Bookstore, in particular Maina, and her amazing, the volunteers in particular at the festival. I really so miss being there, but I haven't really skipped, I don't think, even a single year in these last 30 years. I was looking forward to being there myself and, talking about this book with you in person, but failing which, I'm with Oindrilla, an old friend, and I'm delighted once again to be participating, however, virtually. Now, Oindrilla, you called it an easy read. And I'd just like to say it was a very difficult book to write. It was not an easy writing experience because the pressures as a writer, for me, it was just as the pandemic had started. And all of us were grasping for answers. We didn't know what had happened. And the virus had turned the world upside down. We were confused. We were despairing. Most of us thought we are not going to wake up tomorrow morning. It was death and devastation that was facing us almost every living moment. And under those circumstances, it was certainly not easy writing those stories. And I think it was the first book written during the pandemic and published during the pandemic. So yes, it's a very important book for me. And it was a challenge because I had to, overcome my own sense of despondency and occupy the skins of 26 different characters. The book is written in the first person in the form of monologues. So there was that to start with, that you had to become those characters in order to understand their voice. And once I'd found the voice, the story started to emerge almost organically. And it was like at a demonic speed. I was writing 4 stories a week, which is daunting for by any standards. But I was lucky that I had Simon and Schuster as my publishers. The publishing industry itself was facing tremendous challenges, and they came forward, and I was very clear and very keen that the stories should go out there as the pandemic was, when we were in the thick of it, and not later. It wasn't a looking back on the pandemic book. It was writing it, feeling it, sharing it as it was unfolding. So for me, that they agreed to do it, a big thank you to them. And then, of course, it came out as a physical book later. So for that too, it was fantastic. This also came out during the pandemic. I think the first book about the pandemic during the pandemic. So yes, it was an experience I will always, always cherish, remember. And the fact that I've been able to share these stories so widely is amazing, because some of you may know Lilette Dubé has made a theatre production out of 5 of the stories which she picked. She launched the book, of course, for me, and her voice and her daughter Ira's voice brought the stories incredibly alive. At that time, it was a virtual launch. Now it's a theatre experience. And I mean, for me, that's a big high and a very big new development. And I hope Kolkata will invite us soon to share the theatrical experience, when things are better, because it's a totally different feeling to have that standing ovation at the end of it all and people moved by the stories, because each story you'll find yourself in at least one of the stories. They are real, they're from the gut. There's nothing superficial about any of them. They're deeply felt, and that's how the audience has responded. That's how the readers have responded.
In fact, Lil has written asking if we can bring this to Cal, but that's at a later time. You have said right at the start that how you've talked about how negatively the lockdown impacted on you and how difficult it was, and how, if not for your family, those under your roof and those a phone call away, you would have found it very difficult to make it through. Now, Shobhaa, mental health has been a huge issue during the lockdown, and it's there in lockdown liaisons. And you have been relentless in your portrayal of a breakdown in emotional connections, the crumbling emotional connections, so to speak. Now, do you think that it was this enforced proximity, closeness in narrow confines that altered, destroyed relationships, many more of them in this time?
Well, the claustrophobia is something that was inevitable, given that we had no choice. And the feeling of being trapped, and often with the person you think you know, and you think you've spent so many years with, and a person you can trust, you can love, you have loved, and because of this enforced closeness, the entire equation goes for a toss. It goes for a toss for various reasons, but often claustrophobia of this kind, and with what's raging around you, it has led to a pandemic. Mental health issues are the biggest pandemic that we're going to be dealing with much after the virus, I hope, has left us. So these are emotional depths that we were all maybe compelled to confront and to deal with. There were questions of interpersonal relationships within families that had been pushed under the carpet, that no one wanted to acknowledge, that we had all conveniently become so busy in our professional lives, and our other selves, the outside selves, had become so preoccupied, maybe chasing success, chasing whatever it was. And suddenly, boom, you come to the standstill, and you have all the time in the world, and you are living in a space, and it's kind of crowding in on you in a way that is scary. You feel suffocated. And during this period, if the people you share that space with are not in sync with your emotional self, your emotional life, and you're not in sync with theirs, then there's bound to be a friction of a kind that was absolutely, you could not possibly have imagined that your relationship, which you believed all along was so strong, is not that strong after all. And it's built on some fragility or worse than that, it's built on delusions that you have ideas about one another which are for your own comfort, but may not in reality be what they seem to you in times which are less stressful. So yes, relationships did break down during the pandemic, are still breaking down. And I had divorce lawyer friends who would call and say the maximum number of phone calls they received during the peak of the pandemic were from women mainly, who were saying, we cannot wait for the courts to open. Just get us out of this home, get us out of this marriage. Just get us out before it's too late. Yeah. And people were actually suicidal, and they were in a situation where they were prone to violence towards themselves, towards the people they actually thought they loved. So yes, it has tested a lot of relationships, and I've tried to reflect a lot those the stress points, whether it's with colleagues or working from home or young couples dealing with being in a space where maybe they've run out something which seems so simple or so trivial that they've run out of booze, and they're used to having that evening cocktail or an evening drink or drinking wine on weekends, and it's not available. So suddenly a bottle of vodka or a bottle of gin, a couple can fight over that to the point of leading to violence and a divorce happening.
That's a very interesting story.
Yes, it's in that story. Because that bottle is really symbolic. It's not about the gin. It's not about a bottle of booze. It's about their own lives, which they haven't really dealt with, their own emotional issues. And therefore, the bottle becomes much more important than it ought to be, or in reality, it ever was.
Shobhaa, this book primarily is about the negativity, the turbulence, the chaos unleashed by the pandemic on our lives. And there are many problems, many situations, many problems that so many faced that you've dealt with a lot of sensitivity. The migrant labor problem, the problem of a single old elderly person living alone without help, the sheer fear, terror of contracting COVID, the absolute devastation of a loss of livelihood, just getting on each other's nerves, being at home. And I wanted to ask you, which of these do you think impacted more on our consciousness, our lives?
I would say, if I've heard your question right, Oindrilla, because you're breaking from time to time, which was the story that related most?
Yes.
Did you say?
Yes.
Well, to me, the most important symbol of the pandemic in India that shook us all, in a way that it also shook the world along with us, was the long walk of the migrant workers.
Yes.
It is something I will never forget. It is something that, as a chronicler of our times, it was very important for me to find my voice, not easy, mind you, find my voice, as a man, as a migrant worker, stuck on a construction site in Mumbai, while everybody around him is leaving, but he is reluctant to leave because the migrant worker also has a heart which goes beyond just his own safety or reaching his own home back in the village. So to speak in his voice for me certainly was the toughest story to write, but also it was important for me to write it because the world stared in horror at our response to it, which started with complete indifference. It moved on to denial. It was administrators saying there's nothing like that is happening, and there are no migrants on that road, and it was like compounding one lie after another when it was all out there for you to see. The world could see the plight of those thousands and thousands walking for miles on end, often without water, without food, often dying, in their effort to get back to their village. It was a very heartless state response, and it was important for me to say it, and to say it in my own way, and to chronicle what actually happened. And yes, we did something about it much later, but it was honestly intervention of individuals and people who felt compassionate towards those migrant workers, And it was the citizenry that stepped in, not the state.
Maharashtra, people in Maharashtra
Yes.
were very kind.
They were very kind indeed. And we had Sonu Sood, who really emerged as some sort of a messiah for the migrant workers. And he underlined the crisis better than anybody could have. And he used his celebrity status to make sure that their plight was made widely known.
Yeah.
So we have him to thank as well.
There was a complete lack of preparedness. And then to deal with it, as you said, one lie after another, in denial. But I must say that conversely, on the other side, there's a ray of hope, a beam of hope in so many of the stories. You know, I love some of them. End of a Quest. I think I'm getting the name sort of right. Even Lockdown Funeral. It ends on such a note of hope. I love those. Pressure Cooker Romance.
Oh, yes.
There's another one. Hash. Something, what? Rasam and Hash. Yeah. So it really is love in the time of COVID. And I think Garcia Marquez would have had a laugh over that one.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, other than the issue that was important, which were some of the stories that you personally liked in this collection?
Actually, my top favorite, since you asked, is tough to pick, but it has to be the pressure cooker story.
I love that.
It was such a tender, sweet romance, mainly in this young girl's head, and that all her life, it's about loneliness. I mean, all the stories at the end of it all are about loneliness and how we all dealt with them in our own way. But here is this young girl trapped in her house, and the only sound she hears most of the time is from a neighboring kitchen, a family that's cooking 3 or 4 meals a day, meals that she never ever has had to cook for herself because she's so busy with her career and grabbing something, when she can. And that pressure cooker gives her, on one sense, hope that there is life next door, there's a family there are people eating, and then there is the boss at the end of the phone call who hears that pressure cooker, and there's a connect over the whistle of that pressure cooker, and that immediately gives her a sense of hope that when things are better, maybe, just maybe, the boss may take her on a field trip, which has never ever taken her to, and has marginalized her and her existence and made her feel like nothing. So yes, all the stories are really about loneliness, and the funeral story that you mentioned is also something that I find, because all the stories are about a cross-section of our society. They're not just about the elite or just about migrant workers or just about the working class professionals. It's not about Gurugram couples at war. It's not about a wedding that's never going to take place. It's not about a girl who comes home to her parents after a failed gay relationship and losing a job in Delhi, and then what happens when her mother gets COVID. It's across the board, these stories. But the funeral was poignant for me on another level, because here is a rejected lady, a divorced lady, who's still clinging on to some kind of fantasy about her former life and her grand, wonderful life with a husband who's extremely well-known, sophisticated. And then he has left her for this other lady. And she's also fantasized about that woman and what she could be like. So when they finally meet at the husband's funeral.
There's so much pathos.
There's so much pathos. And you feel for both the women. Yeah. You feel for both the women, and you feel their love as well, equally, for the man who is no more. Yeah. And to attend a funeral under those circumstances, when only 20 people were allowed and the streets were desolate and deserted, and Mumbai itself was a dead city. I mean, that for me, the stillness of Mumbai, the silence that I could hear that silence, and to see a bustling city with nobody on the roads and all the offices. I live in a very busy locality, and there's always sound of life outside at all times, and then suddenly nothing, silence. To me, that was scary.
Okay, Shobhaa, before we get into the book again, I have to ask you this. Why is your dining table your workstation?
I'm sitting on it right now. It is something I feel, it sounds maybe a little silly to someone who may not understand what, if I say my energy field is on a particular spot on that dining table, and that's where I write, that's where I think, that's where my best ideas, my best conversations with family, with friends, fights, making up, good memories, bad memories, all the fault lines that all relationships come with. Everything pretty much happens around that dining table. So I'm invested deeply in that dining table. There's no logical explanation. It's also the center of the
That's
family.
a good one.
It's the center of the way our apartment is. And I'm not one of those writers who's maybe self-indulgent enough to say, I need a room to myself.
Yeah.
And I need to get away from the chaos and I want to write undisturbed. I've never had that privilege or that luxury. So if I'm going to be in the middle of chaos, I may as well be at a spot where I feel I'm in control even when I'm not.
Wonderful. Okay, Shobhaa, all the stories, to get back to Lockdown Liaisons, all the stories are written in the first person. Was that a conscious decision? Why?
Well, the first person just made them come alive for me in a much more vivid and felt way. And the third person would have been a safer option, quite honestly. Then you're talking about somebody else. Here, when I'm writing in the first person, I'm talking at that moment, I am that person.
Yeah.
So that sense of complete and total identification for me happened. I found my voice with the first story. I forget which was the one that I wrote, the very first one, and sent it off immediately as I wrote it. And it was strange because there were days when I was writing 2 stories a day, but in a week, I certainly, my aim was to finish 4 because each Saturday, 4 stories were being published as an ebook. So they were coming to me very organically. I was very, very sensitized to the world outside, a world I always had easy access to, and suddenly there was nothing. I had no access except via television news and phone calls from friends, which were leading to more confusion, more panic, more distress. The more you heard, the worse you kept feeling because no one actually had the answers. No one still has any of the answers. But fortunately, there is a sense of buoyancy. We all do believe that we are somewhat near the end of this nightmare. And, when you start hearing jokes like memes, which really tell you everything, that, which is the first city in your mind that comes with the first name of the first city that comes to you when you think of the pandemic or your life. And everybody automatically says Wuhan, because that city became the most damned city in the world. And we'll never, ever forget the name of Wuhan. So there are lots of things I think led to a churning on so many levels, cerebral, emotional, every which way. We are never, ever going to be the same people, ever. Maybe we'll emerge stronger, better. I certainly hope so. But we will never be the same. I know I've changed, I've changed forever.
Absolutely.
It's irrevocable. I'm not the pre-pandemic Shobhaa Day. I'm a different human being, as we all are.
Yeah. And also, we are going to go down in history. We're like one of those generations. Yes. Spanish flu and bubonic plague.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Shobhaa, you have always written about a woman's sexuality very openly. And there's a lot of there are a lot of incidents in this book where there's very manipulative, unpleasant, forced sex without romance, without shared pleasure.
Yes.
Do you think intimacy, this is how it has panned out today after the pandemic?
Well, intimacy,
more of a basic need.
Well, intimacy certainly took a huge hit, Oindrilla. It was difficult to feel tenderness and romance.
Yeah.
A lot of couples I know tried, but a lot of couples failed. And the brutality of it all was getting to them. And the only form of expression, maybe, of physical expression, was in aggressive sex or the denial of sex or using sex as currency or using sex in a way that, like you said, in a manipulative way. Yes, I definitely think it altered sexual equations in the most intimate of relationships led to nasty breakups. And even today, I find young couples are still reeling because today the responsibilities on young couples. Where is the time for sex? They're dealing with little kids and schooling from home. They are working from home themselves. They're still in a process of getting used to the new normal, which is now going to be the permanent normal from the looks of things. Young couples working, they're fatigued, they're tired. At the end of the day, they're exhausted. What they're looking for is a pillow and not sex. So yes, it was important to document that too in all its real and not so pleasant, maybe even sordid terms, because I think sex and intimacy and tenderness and romance were the victims of the pandemic and still are, till we get to another more, what shall I say, pleasant way of life soon, I hope. Can't hear you. Can't hear you. Sound's gone. Can't hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Women are treated with a lot of empathy in this book. There are too many awful, insensitive men. Why is that?
Well, Oindrilla, the women in all my books are treated with a great amount of sympathy because that's really how I feel about women and about how women have to cope and survive and deal with so many challenges and situations in their lives that often they don't have much control over. And I think during the pandemic, a lot of men, their worst selves emerged because they themselves were dealing with problems of maybe getting fired from their jobs, working from home, in a competitive environment where they didn't know how they were going to be able to pay all the bills, etc. So when these not such nice sides to men emerge, generally the person who is at the receiving end of their anger, rage, frustration happens to be the women in their lives. It could be a mother, it could be their children, it could be their wife, it could be a female colleague. But certainly women have it harder, Oindrilla, as you and I well know. Regardless of the pandemic, women have it harder. So it's not that I want to play or pull out the victim card or any of that. Women have it tougher. That's not a secret. But women also have the resilience and they are survivors. And when it comes to the crunch, we know how to manage our lives. And we do have the inner strength, even under the most awful circumstances and daunting circumstances, to somehow stay afloat. So the book is really about courage and dealing with situations, and often men who are not sympathetic. There's no empathy, there's no understanding, and certainly there is zero support.
Yeah. You know, more in the same strain, there are a couple of stories you've dealt very sensitively with the LGBT issue also here. I think there are two stories. And how difficult it was for them to deal with this, to be who they are and yet hide who they are because they're in a whole new setting, so to speak, they've been forced into. So tell us a bit about that.
They're extremely tough regardless, whether or not there's a pandemic raging, it is not easy. So these were trying times and they tested sensitive relationships in a way that I don't think anyone had prepared anybody to face and confront what it was likely to unleash. Breakups of a kind which were forced often, and it's been hard, and I have championed and will continue to champion, because very often society at large is not kind and not understanding and frequently cruel. And it's time for better representation. It's time for the kind of inclusivity we ask for through legislation. But it's not about legislation alone. It's how we have to change our mindsets.
Yeah.
And exactly. So it was important for me to also write about it, because I feel deeply about it. I feel love and I feel pain.
Yeah. Okay. Shobhaa, what has the audience reaction been to your short stories? Also, would audience reactions and reviews ever change your writing direction?
I've not ever concerned myself too much or been preoccupied with my image. Never. I write the books that I want to write. I am 100% truthful to my readers. I am, at the end of it all, I write for them. I don't write for approval from anybody else, not even my family. So if the stories have been well received, I thank my readers, because it's their support and their encouragement and the feedback I receive constantly. And then seeing them actually being acted out on stage with a superb 3-member cast occupying those different skins has made me feel extremely grateful. And grateful, yes, grateful is the right word. I feel gratitude, truly.
Okay, Shobhaa, human contact has taken a huge hit.
Yeah.
And do you think that with the pandemic, or rather, has the pandemic created a whole new virtual life, a virtual world and platform that is here to stay?
There's no doubt in my mind whatsoever that this is the new world. And it may make a lot of us uncomfortable, but we have to accept that virtual is the way forward. It is the future. And the sooner we accept it and get integrated into that world, the better. I think younger people have already done it. They have accepted it. Children have accepted it even faster, because a lot of kids, like my grandchildren, for example, have not met with other young kids their own age for this 2 years. Some children have been born during the pandemic. They've never interacted or seen another baby.
Yeah.
So it is a world that is seems like from another planet, an alien world. It seems like science fiction. But I'm completely convinced that that is how we are going to be negotiating with one another, with the rest of the world. And in a way, it has also shrunk the world.
Yes.
Because today, it makes really zero difference. I mean, the time zones, yes, but apart from that, you and I could be North Pole, South Pole, and talking to each other, and this is the level of intimacy that perhaps we will come to accept, that we will be meeting virtually like this, our friends, our relatives. We don't know till what time. Our entertainment, everything is going to be consumed very differently. So the sooner we negotiate this new space, the better for all of us. It will help us adjust that much faster. Because yesterday, actually, I was quite distressed. I was attending a grandparents' day of one of my grandkids, and all of it, of course, was virtual. The kids had never met one another. The parents didn't know the other parents except virtually. The grandparents were completely at a loss because they didn't understand what you mean by mute, unmute. Now you're able to see your grandchild. Why don't you speak to your grandchildren? And they're completely thrown off guard because it's not their world. It was never meant to be their world. They want to hug their grandkids. They want to eat with them, play with them, meet them. Not like this. But the grandkids seem much more comfortable and patiently taking their grandparents through it, saying nani or dadi or dadu, do this, do that, wo button ko dabao, abhi ye karo. And they're saying, but bete, kaun sa button, kahan hai ye button? It was so moving and touching, but there it is.
And you said something very important, just not being able to hug people who mean a lot to you, not being able to give them that hug. That has taken so much joy out of lives. Yeah. But Shobhaa, tell us, what did you read during the lockdown?
I read a lot of women writers.
Mm.
I read Kintsugi, which I loved. I read it twice over. Actually, I did read only women writers
Oh,
because nothing to do with the pandemic. It's just my own. I
sensibility.
relate much better to women's voices and words and how they're expressing themselves. I read translations. I did
Yeah.
not read poetry. I did not binge watch anything on Netflix, believe it or not. I read as much as I wanted to. I wasn't like insatiable and saying, oh my God, I mean, what am I going to do? I must finish this book in 2 days. Not at all.
Okay.
I savored books. I took my time.
Yeah.
And I loved Anindita Ghosh's book as well, a lot. There were lots of writers who I may not have read had it not been for the time I gave myself. I created those windows very consciously for myself
Yeah.
to reconnect to the reading habit, which when you're writing your own books, often you forget to read other people's books. It sounds terrible, but it's true. You can either write your own book and be in your own zone or be devouring other people's books. But I made sure I did read a lot during this time.
In fact, you've written that one of the things you did is teach yourself to give more time to yourself. So
Yes.
you slept for at least 9 hours, which I don't think you've ever done in your life.
Never done it in my life, but
Yeah.
now it's cut down to maybe 7 or 8. But it was a luxury that was alien. I didn't know it. I'm a light sleeper, and I used to read very late into the night. I still do. So that's my time to really get into a book and love it and feel it and read it without anybody hammering on the door, saying, open the door, etc. So 7 hours is more than enough, but 9 hours was, oh my God, yes. I wonder if I'll ever go back to my 9 hour sleep.
Okay, I'm going to ask you, just read out this dedication because I loved it. What Shobha's written is to all those incredible COVID warriors across the world who made lives matter while compromising their own. Thank you for being our beams of light in a dark and despondent world. The sky belongs to you. And there is the sky. I just loved it. The sky with its concept of openness and freedom. So tell us a bit about it. Was that conscious, the sky?
Absolutely. The sky, I started sort of talking to the sky, which I'd never done, because I'd come to my balcony or my window and stare up at the sky because that was, to me, represented freedom. Even the birds had stopped chirping outside on the trees. Yeah, I'm not even joking.
Yeah.
It was so eerie. So the sky and its changing colors and its changing moods would give me a great deal of hope, and I would watch for signs, celestial signs.
Yeah.
And so when we were designing the jackets for even the ebooks, what I did do was I requested my children, they love the sky equally, and they photograph the sky a lot. So I told them to give me their shots of their favorite sky. And I would keep sending those to the designers and say, please, 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 just use the sky as a symbol of everything that we hope for, that we look up to, that means freedom to all of us. And the sky really became my friend for the first time without my thinking so deeply about it. But it was really the sky, and I was very sure that's what I wanted as the jacket. And all the ebooks had 4 different jackets, or the pictures shot by my children.
Wonderful. Okay, I think we just have enough time for one question. Shobhaa, this has come in. COVID has inspired many to write. You have always written bold books with strong female characters. Where does your inspiration come from?
It's a question I've never, ever had a kind of intelligent answer to, because how does one talk about the genesis of inspiration? It's my deepest and most heartfelt emotion. I feel feel so strongly about being born a woman. I would want to be born a woman in my next 7 lives.
Yeah.
I feel so strongly about other women. My closest relationships have been with women. My entire life, my colleagues, my relationship with my mother was very, very precious, special, and spiritual to me. With my daughters as well, it's a very different bond. So writing women characters is what actually comes very naturally to me. To write in a male voice is much tougher, but I've done that too. Sethi was written in the male voice.
Yeah.
And during the pandemic, I also had another book out, which was Sheila Ji in first person, and of course also about a woman. I also feel it's very important to have women represented strongly and without compromising, because when people say that who's interested in women's voices, is a question that is very insulting to even respond to. But I have been asked that question. So I guess all my books are an answer to that person who dared to ask me that question in the first place. Who's interested in a woman's voice? Believe me, there are millions of people out there interested and listening and reacting.
And I think what is really important is that pens like Shobha's force people to be interested in women's voices. I also note that she mentions Srila Ji. I just want to remind everyone that that also was a discussion we did for Oxford under the AKLF banner. So thank you so much, Shobhaa. Once again, it's an absolute delight being in conversation with you. And thank you, AKLF, in your 13th edition, going from strength to strength. May this continue. Oxford bookstores, you are an invaluable part of Kolkata's heritage, and you're going to stay that way. Thank you, Maina. Thank you, Preeti.
100 years of Oxford.
Yes, 100 years. It's a century.
Here's to more. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Oindrilla. As always, you were wonderful. Thank you for your friendship.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And it's over and out to the next session. Thank you.